Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Movies and Melodies. A very happy new year to you all. I hope 2024 has started off with a bang. I'm still in the holiday mode, as can be seen by the tree behind me. Before I start off on this episode, I want to thank all of you who have gone in and subscribed to my channel. I request you to spread the news and have more of your friends and family subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. For my first episode for this year, I have decided to go with a very interesting and incredibly talented poet duo, father and son, Janisar Akhtar and his son Javid Akhtar. These two incredibly talented poets unfortunately had a very contentious, complicated, kind of a fractious relationship between them. Janisar Akhtar Saab came from an incredible lineage of scholars and poets. His grandfather, Allama ul Haq Khairabadi, was a Chief Justice in Mughal India, and he actually instigated and helped plan the 1857 revolt against the British. He was jailed for this in Kalapani in Andaman and he died there. But when he was alive, he was also a very talented poet in addition to his legal duties. In fact, so talented that Mirza Ghalib himself actually had him edit his own volume of poetry. And Allama Saab had a son, Abdul Haq, who continued the freedom fight against the British. And he had a daughter, Sayyidun-Nisan Harman, who was also a very talented poetess in her own right. And her son, Mustar Khairabadi, was Janisar Saab's father. Mustar Khairabadi was incredibly talented, a very, very great scholar and poet. And he actually has come out with many volumes of poetry. He's considered one of Urdu poetry's most important poets. One of his poems, unfortunately, have been attributed wrongly to the last Mughal, Bahadur Shah Zafar. Main kisi ki aankh ka noor hoon. That is actually Mustar Saab's poem, but it has been popularized as Bahadur Shah Zafar's poem. Mustar Saab, even though he was a very talented poet, did not really guide Janisar Akhtar in poetry writing. I think it was more that the atmosphere in the house was very poetry oriented and very literature oriented, and this young man picked up a lot of pointers from both his father as well as his father's friends. Janisar Saab was born Feb 18th, 1914 in Gwalior. He went on to study at Aligarh Muslim University. He did his BA and MA there. In fact, he had started his PhD when there were some financial difficulties in the family and some other health issues and so on going on. So he had to come back to Gwalior. He started working there at Victoria College. Then he went on to Bhopal, where he became head of the Department of Urdu Literature at Hamidiya University. So for my first song, I'd like to share one of Janisar Saab's lyrics from the movie CID. This came out in 1956. It was a Guru Dutt production. Devanand, Shakila in the lead, and Wahida Rahman. This was her first movie, and she has a slightly negative role in the movie. Well, her first Hindi movie, I should say. And Janisar Saab has written only one song in the movie. The rest of it, all the lyrics are Majru Sultanpuri's, and O.P. Nair has composed the music for the movie. This song is a duet, Rafi Saab and Geeta Dutt. Rafi Saab has only the chorus to sing. Geeta Dutt does all the singing. Aankhon hi aankhon mein ishara ho gaya.
आँखों ही आँखों में इशारा हो गया, बैठे बैठे जीने का सहारा हो गया। आँखों ही आँखों में इशारा हो गया, बैठे बैठे जीने का सहारा हो गया। आँखों ही आँखों में आंखों में इशारा हो गया, बैठे बैठे जीने का सहारा हो गया, आंखों ही आंखों में इशारा हो गया, बैठे बैठे जीने का सहारा हो गया, आंखों ही आंखों में.
Janisar Akhtar was very good friends with the other amazing poet of that time, Majaz Lakhnavi. Majaz Saab had two sisters, Saifia and Hamidia. As the two friends would meet frequently, Janisar Saab would go to Majaz's house all the time. He met Safiya there, fell in love with her. She was actually a formidable Urdu scholar and poetess herself. They fell in love, they got married in 1943. They still lived separately because she was teaching in Aligarh and he was teaching in Gwalior. So she used to take the train back and forth to meet him, and at one such time in 1945, January 17th, she gave birth to her first child, Javed Akhtar. When the child was born, the father went to see the baby, and one of his friends who was with him at the time mentioned to him that in Muslim tradition, when a child is born, as in Hindu tradition as well, you know, holy words are whispered into the child's ear. So the azan is normally whispered into the infant's ear. So when his friend mentioned that to him, Janisar Saab was a committed atheist. He was a communist. There was no question of religion here. So he decided he was going to recite what for him was his religion, the Communist Manifesto. So he recited the beginning of the Communist Manifesto into this child's ear. Life continued, and a few years later, he got a job at Bhopal at the Hamidia College, where he was head of the Department of Urdu. So the whole family moved down there. About a year and a half after the first child was born, the second child was also born, another boy, and he was named Owais. I have to tell you a very interesting naming story about the first child as well. Janisar Saab was a lot more romantic about naming his first child. Before he got married to Safiya, he actually had written very beautiful romantic poetry for her. And one of the lines was, Lamha lamha jadoo ka fasana hoga, meaning every moment is going to be a story of magic, a magical story. So he decided he'll name his first son Jadoo. And when the child was about 3 or 4 years old and they were planning on putting him into like pre-kindergarten, formal schooling, they decided that Jadoo was too whimsical a name for the child to, you know, formally be enrolled, so they changed his name at the time to Javed. Now the younger child was named Owais, and a few months later, Janisar Saab met a man similarly named Owais, who apparently was a very mean-spirited and kind of a nasty man. So Janisar Saab immediately got back home, changed his younger son's name to Salman, and said, I cannot name a child who reminds me of a mean-spirited man. He continued to teach at Hamidia College for 3 years, and after 3 years, around 1950, what happened was he was in danger of being arrested as a communist. So he left Bhopal and went to Bombay, which was a much more amenable place to communists. The movie industry essentially was filled with communists. There was no question of religious divides there. So he moved to Bombay. She actually applied and got the job of head of the Department of Urdu at Hamidia. So she continued to live in Bhopal. She found it very difficult to manage a full-time, high-responsibility job and raising 2 children all by herself. So she sent Jadoo to her parents in Lucknow and kept the younger one with herself. And a couple of years later, she ended up moving back to Lucknow because she was very seriously ill. She had a really horrific autoimmune disease called scleroderma. and it led to a very, very painful premature death. She passed away at the age of 37, just a day after Javed Saab's 8th birthday, actually, sadly. Janisar Saab was not able to come during the last days of Safiya's life. He ended up there right after her burial. So when he got there, he spent the entire night at her grave, grieving for her. He came back home the next morning and he wrote this amazing set of poetry. It's as if Safiya is talking to him from the grave. It's called Khamosh Awaz. And even before that, when they were both living separately, like he in Bombay and she in Bhopal, she used to write a lot of letters to him, very interesting, amazing letters, very poetic letters too. And these letters were saved by Janisar Saab. He actually transcribed all of them and had them published in 2 volumes. One was called Zere-Lab, which translates to under the lip, and the other was called Harfe Ashna, which means words from a familiar person. So these 2 volumes, even to this day, are considered extremely important poetic works in Urdu. In fact, some universities use them as textbooks as well. So Janisar Saab got married again a few years after Safiya's death. And this marriage did not work very well for his relationship with his children. Janisar Saab continued to write poetry, outside of films as well. He was not an incredibly prolific lyricist for the movies, but he was an amazingly prolific poet outside of the films. He was what they call Qadir-e-Kalami, which means somebody who is very dexterous, very versatile, and incredibly swift in writing poetry. He, among his many, many accomplishments, there is a set of 164 rubaiyat that he has written. It's incredible because half of the rubaiyats are in the voice of a husband speaking to his wife, and the remaining that of a wife speaking to her husband. He had this incredible ability to sort of get into the soul of a woman and speak from her point of view. Very few poets have been able to do that. Sahir Saab to some extent, Kaifi Azmi also to some extent, but I don't think anyone as beautifully as Janisar Akhtar. He also wrote very interesting modern poetry as well. And I think he's also the only lyricist, as far as I could tell, within the Hindi movie industry, who has written a song where it's kind of a question-answer session between man and God. This is from a movie called Sushila. I had shared this song actually at last year's New Year episode. It's a very beautiful question-answer session with Talat Mahmood being the voice of man and asking the questions, and Rafi Saab is the voice of God in more ways than one. For my next song, I would like to share a song from what is considered now a lost movie, Prem Parbat. This came out in 1973. It was actually an incredibly well-made movie and very, very sensitively portrayed, actually. Rahana Sultan, Satish Kaul, and Nana Palsekar in the lead. So the story is that of a young village woman who is married off to a much, much older man. She meets this very young forest officer. They fall in love. And that whole conflict that happens in her mind and, as to what she's going to do, being married to an older, ailing man versus, fulfilling her love with a younger, more handsome, more compatible young man. Beautiful movie. Unfortunately, the original print got lost. They think it got burnt in some kind of a warehouse fire. We don't know, but there are no prints available, which is a huge pity because the movie was really, really awesome. And I was very young when I saw it. and I don't think I appreciated the nuances. I would have loved to have watched it again now as an adult, but it is what it is. The music for the movie was by Khayyam Saab, and all the lyrics by Janisar Akhtar and Padma Sachdev. So this particular song, Lataji has sung it absolutely beautifully. It's the scene, the picturization is this young woman walking through the hills, and there are rivers flowing and so on. Ye dil aur unki nigahon ke saaye.
ये दिल और उनकी निगाहों के साए, ये दिल और उनकी निगाहों के साए, ये दिल और उनकी निगाहों के साए मुझे घेर लेते हैं बाहों के साए, मुझे घेर लेते हैं बाहों के साए. पहाड़ों को चंचल किरण चूमती है, पहाड़ों को चंचल किरण चूमती है, हवा हर नदी का बदन चूमती है, हवा हर नदी का बदन चूमती है. यहाँ से वहाँ तक है चाहों के साए, यहाँ से वहाँ तक है चाहों के साए, ये दिल और उनकी निगाहों के साए मुझे घेर लेते हैं बाहों के साए, मुझे घेर लेते हैं बाहों के साए.
As I mentioned before, his two sons from his first marriage did not have a good relationship with his second wife, and this naturally affected their relationship with their father. So both kids ended up being brought up by their maternal grandparents, and only as adults they got to interact a little bit more with their father. His relationship improved with his sons when they were adults, but probably more with Salman Akhtar than with Javid Saab. It never quite got to the point where they both truly forgave each other for their transgresses. I think Janisar Saab had a very hard time expressing directly to his children what they meant to him, even though he was such an amazing poet. Going back to his poetry, he was so prolific and so quick. There is a very interesting episode that's been related by his son, actually. Apparently, Janisar Saab went to one of his friends' houses in the evening, and he had no idea, but there was a mehfil there with Begum Akhtar ji singing. So when Janisar Saab walked in, Begum Akhtar ji had sung maybe a couple of songs, and she requested the hostess for a break. The hostess was a little taken aback, but she complied, and Begum Akhtar Sahiba came to the hostess and said, I'm very embarrassed. I did not realize that Janisar Saab would be here. I have absolutely nothing of his that I can sing. So would you please leave a couple of poems on the bed in the guest room? I will go in there and I will take like maybe 3 or 4 verses and I'll set them to music and I'll sing, because it's only good manners, the Tehzeeb, for me to sing one of his compositions now that he has graced this mehfil. The hostess knew Janisar Saab very well, so she actually went up to him and said, "Hey, look, this is what Begum Akhtarji is telling me." So he said, if she is going to set something of mine to music right there and then and sing it, it actually behooves me to write her 4 new verses. So in 10 minutes, he wrote 4 new verses for Begum Akhtarji. She set it to music and she sang it at this mehfil. Talk about 2 incredible giants in their own respective fields. Another very amazing incident of his quick mind is that of on the sets of Razia Sultan. Within 2 hours, he composed 100 verses for the song "Ae Dil-e Nadan." Of course, they obviously didn't set all of it to music, but they chose, I think, maybe 4 or 5 of it to record. So this sort of shows you the kind of brain that this man had. Really, really incredible. He also went on to change his style of poetry as, time passed. Like in the 70s, there was a lot of what they called postmodern poetry or Jadid Shairi. And he really took to it. Jadid Shairi there was a lot of realism in it, where what were formerly considered taboo subjects like relationships between a man and a woman or daily social conflicts and so on. They were not, romantic poetry was all that was said, and social reform poetry was done in a very different way, but it was never done in a very straightforward way, which modern poetry started doing. He was very taken by that, and he actually changed his style of writing into Jadid Shairi, and he won the Sahitya Academy Award for a set of volumes that he published in Jadid Shairi called Khake Dil. In 1972, maybe 76, he passed away very, very suddenly of a heart attack at the very young age of 62. So for my last song for Janisar Saab, I want to share one from his first Hindi film movie that he composed lyrics for, a movie called Yasmin. This was Vaijayantimala and Suresh in the main roles, and Talat Mahmood has sung this song for C. Ramchandra's music, Bechain Nazar Betab Jigar.
बेचैन नजर बेताब जिगर बेचैन नजर बेताब जिगर ये दिल है किसी का दीवाना है दीवाना कब शाम हो और वो शम्मा जले कब उड़ कर पहुँचे परवाना है परवाना है दिल का चमन खिलने के लिए आएगा कोई मिलने के लिए है दिल का चमन खिलने के लिए आएगा कोई मिलने के लिए फूलों से कहो तारों से कहो.
We now come to the son, Javid. Javid Saab spent most of his childhood in Lucknow with his grandparents, and when his aunt Hamida got married and moved to Aligarh, he moved with her. She took him with her, and he grew up in Aligarh. He had a very interesting childhood. He had, of course, the poet Majaz at home, after all, his mama, and his other mama. He was also a very talented literary kind of a person, even though he didn't do much poetry and such. And then Hamida ji also herself was a very good writer. So this child was surrounded by a lot of very, very good writers and storytellers in the form of his grandmother. Nabi Bakshi ji was actually illiterate. She never learned how to read and write. She came from a very wealthy zamindar family, and she actually only spoke Awadhi. She didn't know Urdu, she didn't know Hindi. She only spoke in Awadhi. She listened to a lot of different, like news sources and radio programs and such, but only could speak Awadhi. So Javed Akhtar Saab actually, among all the contemporaries, among his cousins and even his younger brother, he actually is the only one who picked up Awadhi because he spent a lot of time with her. She would tell him all kinds of stories, and she would talk to him about various things, maybe even about his mother and how she was when she was growing up. So he ended up becoming very, very fluent in Awadhi. So that actually helped in his lyric writing as well as his dialogue writing for a lot of movies. There's a very interesting incident that happened with him with his grandmother. So when he was probably little over 8 years old, shortly after his mother passed away, his grandfather, who was deeply religious, as was his grandmother, gave him an ayat from the Quran to learn by heart and said, if you learn this by heart, I'll give you 8 annas. He's a child. He's motivated by money or any kind of bribery. And he had a great memory, so he learnt the ayat, and this went on for some time. His grandmother was unaware of this. And then one day, this child was reciting one of the ayats that his grandfather had given him, and his grandmother happened upon this, and she found out what was going on. She was actually very upset with her husband. Her reasoning was this. She said that this child had been entrusted to their care because the parents, well, the mother was not alive and the father was unable to keep these children with him. So she felt that they both were committed atheists. They would not have brought up their children to learn the Quran or practice Islam in any way. So she did not like this kind of what she thought was a sneaky, underhanded way of getting religion into these children. So after that day, his grandfather stopped teaching him the Quran, and Javed Saab is also a very committed atheist. But it's a very interesting view into his grandmother's mind. What an amazingly open-minded, liberal, kind of a forward-thinking woman. She was, an illiterate woman, but for her to think like this, I think was quite amazing. When Hamida ji, his aunt, got married, she moved to Aligarh. Her husband was a professor there. She too had a PhD in economics. So she was also a professor at Aligarh Muslim University. So Javed ji went with her. He finished all of his education there until matriculation. I think he had just started college when he moved to Bhopal to Hamidiya College to finish his undergraduate, his BA. He did very well in the sense of all the extracurricular activities at college. He was a very good debater. He took part in a lot of plays and all kinds of literary pursuits, and quite enjoyed his time at college, made a lot of good friends as well. So for my first song today, I want to share one that he wrote for a movie called Saath Saath. This starred Deepti Nawal and Farooq Sheikh in the lead. It was a very interesting story, that of a young man who is very idealistic. He comes from a wealthy family, but he doesn't agree with the family's lifestyle and their thinking of, or their sense of entitlement, and how they sort of grind the poor into the dust, kind of a thing. So he leaves the family and he's struggling to make a living. He meets this young girl who's also from a wealthy family, but who also thinks like him very idealistically. So the two of them run away and get married, and they actually are very happy, even though they have, it's not like a very comfortable life. But they're kind of getting on, and he unfortunately starts to feel kind of this peer pressure of keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. Once he has a child and the family starts to grow, he feels that he needs to somehow make their life very, very luxurious and so on, and he starts to go down the path of crass commercialism, shall we say, and abandons his principles. And then, how the whole thing plays out is the rest of the movie. But the music was by a very talented music director, Kuldeep Singh, and the lyrics, of course, by Javed Saab. And this song is actually a solo sung by Jagjit Singh. And it is a situation where this young man is trying to dissuade this young girl from marrying him. प्यार मुझसे जो किया तुमने तो क्या पाओगी?
प्यार मुझसे जो किया तुमने तो क्या पाओगी? प्यार मुझसे जो किया तुमने तो क्या पाओगी? मेरे हालात की आंधी में बिखर जाओगी। प्यार मुझसे जो किया तुमने तो क्या पाओगी? रंज और दर्द की बस्ती का मैं बाशिंदा हूँ। ये तो बस मैं हूँ कि इस हाल में भी जिंदा हूँ। ख्वाब क्यों देखूँ वो कल जिस पे मैं शर्मिंदा हूँ। मैं जो शर्मिंदा हुआ तुम भी तो शर्माओगी। प्यार मुझसे जो किया तुमने तो क्या पाओगी?
Javed Saab graduated with a BA in political science, Urdu literature and English literature. According to him, he was a very poor student but was very popular. By this he meant that he was academically not great in the sense of testing in exams and so on. He didn't do well. But obviously his brains absorbed all of the information because the man is absolutely brilliant. After he graduated, he was about 19 or so, he moved to Bombay to earn his living. He says that he didn't come down to work in Bombay in the movies as a writer necessarily. He was just drawn by the glamour. I mean, everyone is drawn to movies, especially in India, I think. And his father was already a lyricist in the movies, so he was familiar with the whole kind of the atmosphere of the movie industry and very drawn to it. He's a good-looking young man, so he may have thought that, he might get a shot in front of the camera. When he went to Bombay, he stayed briefly with his father, but had very, very severe disagreements with his stepmother and ended up walking out of the house. Stayed on the streets of Bombay for quite some time with various friends. He would, be housed with one or the other friend. He was very lucky in that he had extremely good friends. Finally, he managed to get like an apprenticeship with Kamal Amrohi at Mahal Studios. He was there for about maybe a year or so, and then there were some financial difficulties at the studio and he ended up losing his job. Shortly thereafter, S.M. Sagar, who used to produce a lot of B-grade stunt films, hired him as an assistant as well as a lyricist. When he was working on one such movie for S.M. Sagar, he met his future writing partner and very, very good friend, Salim Khan. Salim Saab actually acted in these stunt movies. He was a hero. He was a good-looking man and he acted as a hero in these stunt movies. That's how his filmy career started. Sagar Saab was a very, very good employer. He actually gave Javed Saab a home as well. Javed Saab actually lived with him and his family, because he knew this young man had nowhere to stay. So he wrote the lyrics and he wrote dialogue for this movie, Sarhadi Lutera. But what ended up happening was, I think this is a very common occurrence in Indian movies in particular, and I think movies in general, where the director or the producer, somebody comes in and changes a scene or a dialogue or some part of the script because somehow they feel it's not going to appeal to the audience. And this is what happened with the last scene in Sarhadi Lutera. And Javid Saab, being the young hothead that he was at that time, felt like this was an insult to his skills, and he quit his job. Then went through a short period of unemployment and managed to get a job as an assistant on the sets of the movie Yaqeen. And he wrote dialogues, he wrote scenes, he wrote all kinds of things for that, and he was a general dog's body kind of a person as well during this time. And again, at this juncture in his life, he got lucky with Sagar Saab, who came to him and to Salim Saab, because the two of them got very, very close. They lived close together, I mean, you know, near each other, and they became very, very close friends. And they would always talk about stories that both of them had in their heads for potential movies, kind of a thing. Sagar Saab knew this, so he came to these two and said, hey, look, I have bought this short story from this magazine, the rights to this story. Can you guys write me maybe about a 2 or 2 hour, 15-minute long screenplay for this, and maybe dialogues as well? So the two of them, for 5,000 rupees, 2,500 each, they actually wrote this screenplay. It was for a movie called Adhikar, which actually did moderately well. I mean, it was a low budget movie, so it actually probably did really well considering that aspect of it. And then after that, Sagar Saab's assistant, Sudhir Wahi, he came to them and let them know that Ramesh Sippy was starting a whole story department at his studio. So they said, you know, you guys should go there and apply for jobs there. I'm sure he's going to hire you guys. So the two of them trotted off there and interviewed with Sippy Saab and got the job, actually. So they started writing scripts there at Sippy's studio. And this was where they met Rajesh Khanna, who came very, very desperately to them to rewrite Hathi Mere Sathi, which was Chinnappa Devar's Hindi remake of this movie that he had already, you know, made in Tamil. And the script was extremely dramatic and very inaccurate. So Rajesh Khanna had taken an advance from Devar for this movie and realized only later that the script was hideous and that, you know, he would essentially end his career if he acted in the movie the way the script was at the time. And he had just bought a house. That's why he was desperate for the advance, and he had signed this without really looking at anything. So he came to these two and said, I beg you, please fix this. And they rewrote that script. And that script got remade in Tamil again by Chinnappa Devar as Nalla Neram, with Shivaji in the lead. So after that, they wrote Sita Aur Geeta, and you know, this way they started to move on. Andaz, all of these movies just became big hits, and these two became established as a screenwriting duo, a screenplay writing duo. For the next song that I'd like to share, I'm going to share one which I guess is one of my personal favorites of Javid Saab. It's from Silsila, which came out in '81. Shiv Hari's music, a lot of lyricists, Nida Fazli, Kamal Hassan, then Rajendra Krishan, in addition, Harivansh Rai Bachchan as well, in addition to Javid Saab. So this particular song, it's like a conversation and a song. You have Amitabh Bachchan speaking his thoughts. मैं और मेरी तन्हाई अक्सर ये बातें करते हैं, तुम होती तो ऐसा होता, तुम होती तो वैसा होता, and so on. And then you have Lata ji's ethereal voice coming in with ये कहाँ आ गए हम यूं ही साथ साथ चलते.
ये कहाँ यूं ही साथ साथ चलते, तेरी बाहों में है जानम, मेरे जिस्म जहाँ पिघलते, तेरी बाहों में है जानम, मेरे जिस्म जहाँ पिघलते। ये कहाँ आ गए हम, यूं ही साथ साथ चलते।
ये रात है, ये तुम्हारी जुल्फें खुली हुई हैं, है चांदनी या तुम्हारी नजरों से मेरी रातें धुली हुई हैं। ये चांद है या तुम्हारा कंगन, सितारे हैं या तुम्हारा आंचल, हवा का झोंका है या तुम्हारे बदन की खुशबू, ये पत्तियों की है सरसराहट कि तुमने चुपके से कुछ कहा है। ये सोचता हूं मैं कब से गुमसुम कि जबकि मुझको भी ये खबर है कि तुम नहीं हो, कहीं नहीं हो, मगर ये दिल है कि कह रहा है कि तुम यहीं हो, यहीं कहीं हो।
तू बदन है, मैं हूँ छाया, तू ना हो तो मैं कहाँ हूँ, मुझे प्यार करने वाले, तू जहाँ है मैं वहाँ हूँ। हमें मिलना ही था हमदम, किसी राह भी निकलते, हो हमें मिलना ही था हमदम, किसी राह भी निकलते। ये कहाँ आ गए हम, यूं ही साथ साथ चलते।
Javed Saab and Salim Saab together wrote 2 Kannada screenplays as well, in addition to all the Bollywood movies, Raja Nanna Raja and Premada Kanike. It's incredible how talented these two were. The kinds of scripts they wrote, the kind of screenplays they wrote, have actually revolutionized Bollywood cinema. And I don't think people, especially today, understand the importance and the relevance that these two had on changing the face of Indian cinema, so to speak. Javed Saab and Salim Saab wrote for a long time. I think they had almost a 10-year collaboration, and then they decided to part amicably because they felt not only ideological differences, but just they felt there was no spark anymore when they were writing together. They continued to be very good friends, and it's not as if, you know, they had some big feud or anything going. It was just that they felt the time had come when they needed to stop this collaboration. Javed Saab continued to write on his own very successfully. He also segued into writing lyrics for movies. He claims he did this very reluctantly, but I think there was some small part of him that actually needed to do this as well, because the innate poet in him had to come out in some way. On the personal front, he married Hani Irani, who was a successful screenplay writer in her own right, as well as being one of the cutest child stars ever. And the two of them have 2 children, Zoya Akhtar and Farhan Akhtar, who are also incredibly talented movie makers and, in Farhan's case, singing as well as acting. Javed Saab claims that when he and Salim Saab would write, Salim Saab had the more romantic and more kind of a better way, shall we say, of looking at the whole script and the screenplay. And he was the one who was responsible for all the pithy little one-liners. And he also claims that the one-liners were inspired by his reading a lot of American westerns and pulp fiction. For example, the dialogue from Dawn, "Dawn ko pakadna mushkil hi nahi, namumkin hai." Too much, no? Such good dialogues. even from Sholay. So many one-liners that is just... Anyway, it's all fangirling at this point. Javed Saab continued to be relevant with his lyric writing, even through now. He continues to write lyrics even now. I mean, he can write any kind of very modern sounding song as well. Señorita, for example. He writes, of course, for his children's movies, but he also writes for other movies. He can write anything, I feel. His talent is remarkable. He's also very, very outspoken in his criticism of other people's movie-making styles, lyric writing, poetry, and the political situation. I find him incredibly funny. I don't think I would like to interview him because I'd be really afraid of his intellect, but I would just love to meet him and, you know, have him talk at me. For my last song for today's episode, I want to share one of, again, my personal favorites. It's from a remake of a Tamil movie, Devar Magan. This starred Kamal Hassan and Revati in the lead. Incredibly fabulous movie in Tamil. The Hindi version, Virasat, had Anil Kapoor and Tabu and Pooja Batra. Also a well-made movie, but I recommend you see both, but very highly recommend you watch the Tamil movie. It's really, really fantastic. Kamal Hassan is absolutely masterly in that portrayal of this feuding zamindar. The story could be set in any part of rural India. It's the constant family feuds that happen over real or imagined slights. And these feuds are continued for generations where no one can any longer remember why it started, but they will continue feuding. So the song that Javed Saab has written for this movie, it's Anu Malik's music. It's a very fun, folksy kind of a song. And what was incredible was that he had to fit this into the same tune that had originally been composed and sort of maintain the essence of that particular song, the kind of folksy, cutesy kind of flavor that that original song had. It was sung by Kumar Shanu and Chitra, Payale Chunmun Chunmun.
पायले झुनमुन झुनमुन झांझरे रुंझुन रुंझुन कितना मधुर है ये मिलन
छनछनन चूड़ी बोले सनसनन पुरवा डोले गूंजे ये धरती और गगन
पायले झुनमुन झुनमुन झांझरे रुंझुन रुंझुन कितना मधुर है ये मिलन कभी चलती हो छम छम कभी चलती हो थम थम धड़कता दिल है धम धम जो प्यार में नदी बहती है झरझर हवा कहती है सरसर है फैली बात घर घर बेकार में
गोरिया गाए गुनगुन साजना झूमे सुन सुन प्यार में खोए है ये मन
पायले झुनमुन झुनमुन झांझरे रुंझुन रुंझुन कितना मधुर है ये मिलन.
That's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode on these two wonderful poets. Before I leave, I want to say, or rather remind you, to subscribe to the channel as well as spread the word to your friends and family and have them subscribe as well. I will be back in 2 weeks with yet another episode. But until then, remember, music is food for the soul. Keep listening.